Welcome to our class on Chassidus. We are learning this week a very special Chassidic discourse from the Rebbe. The Rebbe said this Chassidic discourse in Shabbos, Parsha Shmois, Yud Tes, the 19th day of the month of Tevis, in the year Tavshin Mem Ches, 33 years ago. And the Rebbe went on to certify and edit this Chassidic discourse in honor of Chaf Daled Tevis, the anniversary of the first Chabad Rebbe's passing in the year Tavshin Nun, 31 years ago. The Chassidic discourse is based on the beginning of the prophet of the Haftorah for Shabbos Parsha Shmois, where the Haftorah is from the prophet Isaiah. And the prophet says, "Haboyim Yashresh Yaakov." There's going to be the time that's going to come that the seed of the planting of Yaakov is going to give forth its fruit and its produce. So the Rebbe brings from the Tzemach Tzedek, who brings down the translation of the Targum Yonis ben Uziel, that says that what are we referring to when we say Haboyim Yashresh Yaakov? It's going to come the time when the seed, the planting of Yaakov, is going to give forth its produce, its fruit. So he says it's referring to the time of the Geula. It's referring to the time of the redemption. What's the connection to the redemption? So he explains and he says that it's referring to the time when the ultimate redemption, when Mashiach is going to come, and Hashem is going to bring us to the land of Israel, and then it's going to be Yashresh Yaakov, that Yaakov is going to give forth its produce. And he explains in the Chassidic discourse, the Tzemach Tzedek explains that what is the idea of Yashresh? Because we know that when you plant something in the ground, so the seed goes underground. In the world of Kabbalah, it goes into a state of concealment. And when the thing is in concealment, you don't see anything. But then all of a sudden, something gives birth. So what is the birth? The birth is revelation. So in other words, just like before it gives birth, it's in a concealed state in the ground, or for example, a seed in its mother's womb, and then when it gives birth, you have the revelation. So based on this, he explains the Targum that says that it's going to give birth. What does that mean it's going to give birth? That the yesrsh of the neshama, the root of the soul, Yashresh, comes from the word of yesrsh. The source of Yaakov is going to give birth. When is that going to happen? In a revealed way, when Mashiach comes. So in other words, what the Tzemach Tzedek is explaining, what the Targum is referring to, that it's referring to the Geula, redemption, because today our neshama is concealed. The source of the neshama is concealed. When Mashiach comes, it's going to give birth, we'll see the source of the neshama in a revealed way. So that's one insight into Haboyim Yashresh Yaakov. It's referring to the Geula, where the Shirish, the source of the soul, will be revealed. So then he brings another insight into Haboyim Yashresh Yaakov, that's referring to the observance of mitzvot. What does that mean practically? So he gives a simple example. So what happens is, when you plant, Yashresh, when you plant, the first insight was Shirish. The source will be revealed when Mashiach comes. That's the first insight. Here he's saying shirish. What does that mean? When you plant in the ground, so you plant and then things give forth. So over here he's saying is that Yashresh is referring to planting mitzvahs. That when the neshama is planting and doing mitzvahs. Every time you do a mitzvah, you're planting another seed, another mitzvah. Now, so what is referring to Yashresh Yaakov? That Yaakov is busy, referring to all Yaakovs. We're all part of Yaakov. We're busy planting seeds, or busy doing mitzvahs. Now, what's the connection? We know anytime you have two insights, there's usually a connection between the two. What's the connection between the source of Yaakov that's going to be revealed when Mashiach comes and the idea of doing a mitzvah? And he explains very simple. Because that the shirish, the source of the soul, is going to be revealed when Mashiach comes. Like the first interpretation of the Targum Ben Aziel, that is coming about through the fact that we'll do mitzvahs. That's going to be the cause of the revelation of the source of our soul when Mashiach comes. And he explains as follows. Because when it comes to the neshama and the source of the neshama, there's different levels. Now, there's different levels to the source of the soul. The main root of the soul, if you go to the depth of the root of the soul, that's the way the soul is connected to Hashem above nature. You have parts of the soul that's connected to nature, and you have the parts of the soul that's connected above nature. The part of the soul, the deepest part of the soul that's connected to Hashem above nature, how do you bring out the part of your soul that's connected to Hashem above nature? That is by doing mitzvahs. So every time we do a mitzvah srichenech, we do a mitzvah Hashem, whether we do one of the 248 positive, or we refrain from sinning of one of the 365 negative, what happens is we bring out the source of our soul, which is connected to Hashem above nature. And he explains why, because we know that there's different ways our souls connect to Hashem. One is, like we said, by doing mitzvahs, and that we connect to our soul, which is above nature, and then we connect to Hashem by learning Torah. How do you learn Torah? You learn Torah with your intellect, Chachma. Now, Chachma, we know, is the first of the Sfiros. In Hebrew, it's called Reishis Eishtalshalos, the beginning of the evolvement of all the Sfiros. And so, since it's part of Hishtalshalos, it's nature. On the other hand, when it comes to doing mitzvahs, it's above nature. How do you get to there? You get to there specifically doing mitzvahs. And that's why he quotes over here from the famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. And what does it say there? That Kol shemasav merubi mechachmasai, whoever their deeds, actions, mitzvahs, is more than intellect, more than learning Torah, is compared to a tree that has very, very strong roots and multiple roots, and no one can obviously take that away. Why is that? Because it's much stronger. Because the source of the soul it gets revealed through doing mitzvahs. Mitzvahs are much more powerful than Torah. And based on this, he explains the connection between those two insights. That by us doing mitzvahs in this world, which is the second insight, doing mitzvahs in this world, we draw the source of the soul, and that revelation of the source of our soul that we're using today by doing mitzvahs is going to be when Mashiach comes. Yisyaldun, the Beis Yaakov, which means the source of our soul is going to be revealed, and it's going to glow in a powerful way, which is the first insight of the Yisrsh and Neshama, which is going to be revealed when Mashiach comes. Now, so based on this, we know that the Rebbe brings that it's known that when in the Chassidic Discourse of the Rabbeim, everything is specific. Even the flow, if something says first and something says after, there's a reason why it says that. So he asks a very simple question. When Mashiach comes, what's going to happen? It's going to be revealed the source of the soul that did mitzvahs now. Now, how does that happen then? By doing the mitzvahs now. So seemingly, if the first thing that happens is doing the mitzvahs now. By doing the mitzvahs now, we're drawing in the essence of our soul, which will be revealed when Mashiach comes. So seemingly, it should have been the opposite. It should have first listed the first insight about Habayim Yashish Rak is referring to mitzvahs, because that's what we do first. And then it should say, referring to the idea that what happens when Mashiach comes is going to be revealed. That's question number one. The second question, as he asks, is that when it speaks about the first insight, where the first translation, when he says "Aboyim Yashish Rak" is referring to the redemption, so over there he also explains "Haboim," referring to coming in the future. However, when he explains the second insight, where it's referring to doing mitzvahs, he doesn't connect it to the verse of Aboyim, and the question is, why is that? Okay, so that's the two questions he has. So the Rebbe goes on to explain, he says like this. This that we say, that Yashresh Yaakov, the second insight, is referring to doing mitzvahs, Notice we're planting seeds, we're planting mitzvahs, we're doing mitzvahs. So there's two ways we can look at it. What does that mean? One is that Yaakov, resembling all of Klal Yisrael, is busy planting seeds of doing mitzvahs, like we mentioned before. The second way you can say that by doing mitzvahs, you're planting in Yaakov. You're planting in Yaakov. Like, for example, the Alter Rebbe writes in Torah, which, by the way, this week is the yard site, the Yom Hilula of the Alter Rebbe, and he says very simple: just like you take a seed and you plant it in the ground, and it has to be planted specifically in the ground. You can plant a seed on the table; it's not going to grow. It has to be planted in the ground. So he says the same thing also when it comes to planting mitzvahs. The verse says, Oir zarua latzadik, that you plant a light into the tzaddik. That means you're planting mitzvahs into the Jewish people. As we know the other verse that says, Ki atem tiyu li eretz chayfetz, that we're going to be, referring to the Jewish people, a land full of opportunities. By doing mitzvahs, we're planting within ourselves the light of Hashem. And that is also what the verse says, Yashrish Yaakov Yotzis Uperach, that in Yaakov itself, that by doing the mitzvahs now, there's going to be a growth in Yaakov. So again, to recap, what he's saying is that when you're saying planting mitzvahs, it can mean that we're doing the mitzvahs, and we're planting, obviously, for Mashiach Hans will be revealed the growth of the mitzvahs, or by doing a mitzvah, planting in ourselves. So he explains over there, the Alter Rebbe explains in the Chassidic Discourse in Torah, that this that we say, Haboyim Yashresh Yaakov, which is again referring to the planting of the Torah mitzvahs of the Jewish people. How does that happen? So it says, in the Torah it says, how does that happen? It happens specifically through coming into the land of Israel, into the land of Egypt. Why is that? And as we're saying, that planting of the mitzvahs happens by coming into Mitzrayim. Why is that? So the Alter Rebbe explains, because we know that in order for us to receive the Torah, Matan Torah, the Torah we got from Matan Torah, Hashem didn't just give us the Torah, Matan Torah. We had to go to Mitzrayim. We had to go through Galus. And so the Alter Rebbe explains, just like in order to receive the Torah, we have to go into Galus Mitzrayim. So the same thing also, this Galus, this exile that we're in, this is a preparation for receiving the real gift of Chassidus, which is going to be revealed on the greatest level when Mashiach comes. In other words, like this: just like in order to receive the revealed Torah, we have to go through Mitzrayim, the same thing also to receive the real benefit of Pnimius Torah Chassidus comes through the Avodah and Galus. And so the Rebbe says, based on this, you can say that this Galus that we're in, which we call the last Galus, the last exile, is a preparation for the revelation of Chassidus, which is going to be Mashiach comes. Because based on this, you understand why it says, Haboyim Yashresh Yaakov, which means that the Yashresh comes from the word to plant, that we're planting in the Galus itself. The Galus is the planting. Because, just like the Galus of Mitzrayim was the planting that brought about Matan Torah, so the same thing also, because we know that it says in reference to the Galus of Mitzrayim, it's called Kur HaBarzel. It was the place where we had to literally plow with iron plows to work ourselves out, and we should be ready for we should be ready to receive the tremendous revelation of Matan Torah. As the Jewish people were refined, as it says, Eretz Chayfetz, we refined ourselves, and through that we refined ourselves, and we learned Torah, and we did mitzvahs. But in Mitzrayim, that caused us that after we left Mitzrayim and after we received the Torah, we had the true Yashresh Yaakov. There was able to be a tremendous plowing within us, a spiritual plowing, that we were able to be real vessels for the tremendous Torah. So therefore, based on that, he says, that's also why that specifically through this Galus, the Galus that we're in, this is going to be a preparation for what? For when Mashiach comes. So in other words, So based on this, he says, Habayim, when we say Habayim, we're coming into, that means we're going into the Gullus. Just like the going into Gullus was the preparation for the Gula, so the same thing also, the going into this Gullus, Habayim, going into this Gullus is the same idea. By us doing our Avodah, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs, praying, even though while it's Gullus, it's dark, that's going to give us a tremendous revelation what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. So in other words, that the planting in the Bnei Yisrael, that's going to be the cause for our growth when Mashiach comes, is referring to specifically the mitzvahs that we do in the times of Galus. Like the Alter Rebbe writes clearly, that all the tremendous revelations that's going to happen when Mashiach comes is dependent on our work and our avodah, what we do in times of Gullus. So Habayim Yashresh Yaakov means when we do our avodah now in Gullus, we're planting the seeds for the tremendous revelation, what's going to happen by the Geula. And so the Rebbe explains that's why when the Tzemach Tzedek brings in the second interpretation referring to planting in the mitzvahs, he doesn't say the idea of Habayim, that we're planting within Bnei Yisrael, which is referring to the planting of the Bnei Yisrael in the times of Galus, because that when Mashiach comes, we're going to have tremendous revelation, is referring to the revelation. It's referring to based on our avodah that we do in the times of the temple, in times of Galus, and every one of those has a specific value. In other words, the avodah of Zman Habayis, which we'll soon see, the work that we do in the times of the temple and the work in times of Gullus is two different avodas, but ultimately they both give us the tremendous revelation when Mashiach comes. But on the other hand, when he says Yashresh Yaakov doing the mitzvahs, is referring to mitzvahs in all the time. So to recap, what he's saying is as follows. Habayim Yashresh Yaakov means that by doing our avodah, we're creating the revelation when Mashiach comes. The fact is, the avodah that we do in the times when we had the temple was one type of an avodah, one spiritual work, which brought a different net effect. The avodah which we do in Zman and Galus is a different avodah, which brings a different net effect. So that's why he doesn't say he doesn't use the word habayim, because there's different insights into habayim. What are you talking about? But he just talks about Yashresh Yaakov, which that applies to both different avodas, both different spiritual works of the times of the temple and the times of Galus. So now he's going to explain the deeper insight behind the power of doing mitzvahs. That we said when you do a mitzvah, you reach above Ishtalshalos, you reach the infinite, versus when you learn Torah, you only reach Chachma. And he says like this: why is it that when you do a mitzvah, you reach above Ishtalshalos, above nature? And he explains there's two reasons. One reason is because when a person does a mitzvah, you draw down from a much greater place than you do when you learn Torah. Like we explained before, that when you learn Torah, you're only getting to Chachma. You only draw down from Chachma. When you do a mitzvah, you draw down from above nature. That's one power of mitzvahs over Torah. Again, the first is because Torah only gets you to Chachma, Hishtalshalos, a finite place, and doing a mitzvah takes you above Ishtalshalos, infinite. That's one reason. The other reason is, when you learn Torah, you're bringing light into the world. That's great. It's amazing. We should always learn Torah. On the other hand, when you do a mitzvah, you have the power and the pro. I'll say it in Hebrew and I'll translate it, or Aramaic, is hapcha chashoicha linhoira. When you do a mitzvah, you're taking something that was dark and you're transforming it into something bright. In other words, when you learn Torah, you bring light into the world. When you do a mitzvah, you're transforming your body. You're transforming your animal soul. You're transforming the place that you're in this world. 3 transformations: your body, your animal soul, and the world you're in. Where does that happen? That happens specifically by doing a mitzvah. So again, to recap, because we're going to go deeper into it. The benefit of doing a mitzvah over learning Torah, what he says over here is 2 points. Point number 1 is that when you do a mitzvah, you draw from above nature, versus when you learn Torah, you only get to Chachma, which is part of nature. And the second reason is that when you do a mitzvah, you're transforming your darkness into light. You're transforming the body, you're transforming your animal soul, and you're transforming the world that you're in. Now, what's the difference? What's the difference? He says like this. Because when you're dealing with, by doing a mitzvah, you're drawing down from above Ishtalshalos. So over there, in the first idea, that by doing a mitzvah, you're drawing from above nature, over there's a difference between what you're drawing down in the times of the temple and in the times of Gullus. Why is that? Because when a person does a mitzvah, so it's a mitzvah. You checked it off, you did a mitzvah. But when a person does a mitzvah with humility, recognizing that Hashem is really Hashem Hu Elikim, and we're just a vehicle to do Hashem's mitzvahs, when we have real humility, so then the mitzvah is much more powerful. And because it's more powerful, you actually draw down from even a higher place. So again, when you do a mitzvah, it's a mitzvah of Hashem. But when you do it with bittul, it's like creating a turbo engine to it. You're drawing down from even a higher place. Now, when is there more humility? Now, in Gullus, or in the times of the temple? So the Rebbe says very clearly that humility is more found when? In the times of the temple. Why? Because the fact is like this. When we're in Gullus, which means Hashem is concealed, you cannot really have the true prostration, the true internal humility, because humility comes from seeing God in godliness. Because the more you see and you realize that Hashem Hu Elikim, that Hashem is really the God, there's less of you. But what happens when you don't see God in godliness? You know it. I get it. You know it. But if you don't really see it, how much humility can you have? So the greater you see Hashem, the greater you see divine providence, the more humility you're going to have. In other words, like for example, it says in our prayers. What does it say in our prayers? Vein onu yecholim. We can't. Lalois, to go up. V'leirois, and to see Hashem, and therefore we can't prostrate ourselves, which means that because we can't go to the temple, we can't see the tremendous revelation, therefore we can't prostrate ourselves. We're lacking that ability to have the true humility for Hashem. So that's when you're talking about internal humility you can't have, because the light is off. Times at the temple, they saw. They were totally humbled. They were totally humbled for Hashem. But he says even a step further, even the external humility, the humility of just physical prostration, physical humbling yourself, even the physical part, which comes from understanding godliness, which we really do have today. We could comprehend, we could meditate, we can learn, we can try to understand. It's not complete. It's not the way it should be. Why? Because even our comprehension of godliness in the times of Gullus is not real. It's not truth. So therefore, drawing down, by doing a mitzvah, drawing down the light of Hashem in the times of the temple, where you had greater humility, you're drawing down from a much higher place. Now, the main drawing down from the higher place, when is that going to be when Mashiach comes? Because then we're going to have mitzvahs in the highest level, in a complete state. As it says, k'mitzvahs ritzonecha, like the mitzvah of Hashem. Now, so again, just to recap. The first component of mitzvahs, that mitzvahs allows you to draw from the highest places, above Ishtalshalos. So there's a difference between exile, that we're living in now, and the times of the temple. In the times of the temple, because we had a greater ability to see Hashem, we went to the temple, we saw God revealed with all the miracles in the temple, we had much more humility. So we reached a much higher place. Today, we don't see, and even comprehension is weak. So the humility is not strong. We can still do mitzvahs, and we should do, but the humility is not there. So we're not going to be able to draw down the greatest level. That is the component of mitzvahs that comes through humility, which causes drawing down, so we can't go so high today in Gullus. In the times of the temple, we can go much deeper. But then he says, on the other hand, what's the second component of a mitzvah? The second component of a mitzvah is, again, I'll say it in Hebrew, I'll translate, is hapcha chashoichol and ahoira. You're taking darkness, you're taking exile, and you're bringing light into exile. When is that? That's more now, in the times of exile than in the times of temple. Times of temple, the light was on. What kind of transformation is there? Transformation there is, but not on such a level. Today, in Galus, we have the power through our mitzvahs to bring the greatest light to the darkest places. Why? Because the darkness of our body, of our animal soul, of the world, all three of them, our body, the animal soul, and the world, like the way it's in Galus, is the greatest darkness. Even darker than the darkness itself. This dark, and this is even darker. And when a person does a mitzvah in times of galus, and there's plenty of mitzvahs to do, so through that, you're transforming the darkness, you're transforming your body, you're transforming your animal soul, and you're transforming the world. And what happens then is darkness gets transformed to light. So you see clearly, when it comes to a mitzvah, there's two components. One is drawing down a light, and that happens by bittul, humility. That happens more in the times of the temple. On the other hand, transformation happens more now than in the times of the temple. Now, when Mashiach comes, so what's going to happen then is the revelation of the accomplishment of the mitzvahs is going to be revealed, our avodah. What's going to be revealed? Both. The component of the mitzvahs that we did in the times of temple with tremendous humility, and the component of mitzvahs that we do now, transforming darkness to light. Both of those are going to be revealed when? When Mashiach comes. In other words, the revelation of doing a mitzvah from tremendous humility of the times of the temple, and the revelation of the mitzvah by transforming darkness into light. So the Rebbe says that it's possible to say this, that the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, that the revelation, what's going to be like when Mashiach comes, is dependent on our avodah and our actions, our work in times of galus. Because in Tanya, what is he referring to? He's not referring to the times of the temple. He's referring to the times of galus, when it's dark. And when we do our avodah of mitzvahs, referring to the part that we're transforming darkness into light. Or as the famous line is, Yisrei na'or habam min ha'choshech, the greater amount of light that shines when you're specifically elevating darkness. And this revelation is going to be when Mashiach comes. Yisrei na'or min ha'choshech. That is dependent on our avodah in galus. And this, that when Mashiach comes, the revelation of the infinite light of Hashem that's revealed through mitzvahs, that has to do with our avodah and galus. That's what the Alter Rebbe is referring to when he talks about in Tanya. And the Rebbe says that even this revelation, the revelation of the mitzvahs, is that's dependent on us doing our avodah now, even though he asks a very simple question. We're going to do mitzvahs today, and that's going to bring tremendous light. But guess what? When Mashiach comes, we're also going to be doing mitzvahs. And over the mitzvahs that we're going to be doing when Mashiach comes are going to be perfect. They're going to be pristine. They're going to be complete. And therefore, the light that's going to come by doing the mitzvahs when Mashiach comes is also going to be complete. But on the other hand, in order for the mitzvahs that we do when Mashiach comes to be complete, that has to come as an introduction of us doing our mitzvahs in this world. Because when we do mitzvahs in this world, that will cause a tremendous light, and that will be an introduction and prepped the way for the mitzvahs that we do when Mashiach comes. Like the Rebbe says, we all know that even though we got the Torah from Hashem and Matan Torah, but because the Avos, our forefathers, Avram, Yitzchok, and Yaakov, went ahead and they observed the Torah and they did the mitzvahs before it was given, that prepped us and that helped us with doing our avodah after we received the Torah from Hashem. And the Rebbe says it's very possible that this idea of the tremendous revelation, that will come not necessarily because of what we do in the time of Galus, that's going to come because of the spiritual work we do in the time of the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Because in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, we were on a much higher level than we're now in Galus. And therefore, so the doing the learning Torah and more importantly doing the mitzvahs in the times of Beis HaMikdash, when a person does the mitzvahs and you're doing it on a much higher level, so that's going to be on a level compared to the mitzvahs that we're going to be doing when Mashiach comes. So therefore, the Rebbe says like this. This that our mitzvahs that we do now is a preparation for the mitzvahs when Mashiach comes, is referring to specifically what? The mitzvahs of the times of the Beis HaMikdash. And that's one reason Rebbe explains why it's interesting is that specifically in the time of Galus, there was added many customs and beautification of mitzvahs. And also in learning, there's a lot of additions in the times of Galus, not only specific and detailed items, but general ideas. We know, for example, that before we went into Galus, guess what? There was no Mishnah written down. And because we went into Galus, the Mishnah was written down through Rabbeinu HaKadosh in the times of Galus. But then obviously, the Galus was not yet intensified. But as the Galus intensified, they wrote down the Brises, the Talmud, which was specifically organized in the time of Galus. Why? Because we went into Galus and we needed to have the completion of the Avodah of Galus, so we needed to add more light. Therefore, we wrote down the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Gemara, and so on and so forth. And therefore, the Avodah of the time of Galus will actually bring to the completion of doing the mitzvahs when Mashiach comes. Now, Rebbe goes on to explain even a step further. He says like this. The difference between doing mitzvahs, in other words, one is drawing down the light, which we said is much greater in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, and the transformation that happens, which is more now in the times of Galus. So this is also the same, is connected with our avodah, our work, which will create the revelation when Mashiach comes. In other words, like this. In reference to drawing down the powerful light by doing the mitzvahs, so since the completion, which is going to be revealed, is going to be when Mashiach comes, so that's going to cause about through our avodah now will create that tremendous revelation. And in reference to the transformation by doing mitzvahs, which happens now, which is transforming darkness into light. So in other words, we know that there's darkness, and we know we have to transform it. So therefore, our work now, and the revelation of our work, which will be when Mashiach comes, as we know when Mashiach comes, it says, V'esruach hatuma avir min oretz, that the impurity, the spirit of impurity is going to be wiped away. So it's two separate things. In other words, when we do our avodah of drawing down light, that's the same connection with when Mashiach comes, also drawing down light. Today it's about taking away darkness, which that causes a special light later, which is two separate ideas. So based on this, Rebbe explains why in the Chassidic Discourse of the ''tshmach he brings specifically when we're going down into Galus, going down into Galus, and he says that he brings the idea of that habאים yashar is referring to Geula, Mashiach coming, and the second one is referring to planting mitzvahs. Why? Because he explains like this: because this that we're planting mitzvahs now, we're planting mitzvahs. And what is the idea of planting mitzvahs? The purpose of planting is so that you should have growth to come out of it. So what he's referring to when he says planting, he's referring to planting mitzvahs, and that causes the tremendous revelation that comes down, not the transformation that comes through it. So in other words, when the ''tshmach and the Chassidic Discourse is referring to that the avodah that we're doing now, which will cause the light when Mashiach comes, is not the transformation of Galus. It's referring to the avodah in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. So because it's the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash, that's why he speaks about the revelation of Mashiach first. And therefore he doesn't bring the whole idea of going down into Gullus, which we're in now, because going down into Gullus is a reference to the transformation, not the light that's going to be drawn from it. In other words, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, what's the main focus? By doing the mitzvahs, we're drawing down the light. Now in Gullus, the main focus is doing the avodah in the times of Gullus. And that's why he says, that's why it also says that Yashresh Yaakov is referring to doing the mitzvahs, and he says it after the Gili of Lasalavi. Why? Because the drawing down the light that comes to doing the mitzvahs comes from where? From our Shorish HaNeshama, and this is going to be specifically when Mashiach comes. In other words, like this. What he's saying is as follows. There's two types of avodah in mitzvahs. There's one in the times of Beis Hamikdash that we saw the light, we felt a bit, then we draw down the light. Then you have the avodah now, which is transformation. So the avodah then is about bringing the light, which is all about what's going to be Mashiach comes. Today the avodah is transformation, and that causes a light which is totally two separate components. So based on this, the Rebbe asks a very, very simple question. The connection of doing mitzvahs now, which is the second insight, in reference to the redemption, which that's the first insight that Tzemach Tzedek explains, that has to do with doing mitzvahs now. It's about Yashresh Yaakov, transforming the world. And the goal of the transformation, so that afterwards it should be tremendous revelation in the world. But the fact is, what does he bring first? He brings the Targum B'Yonis Ben Uziel, which is referring to the Regula, redemption. And because he brings that first, obviously what he's trying to make a statement is that even though Yashresh Yaakov is the avoid of doing the mitzvahs, but what does he bring first? A reference to the Gula, which is going to happen in the future. So why does he do that? Why does he bring that first? And he says something very, very profound and very, very powerful. And he says like this. Because he's trying to bring out that the main focus is the revelation of the redemption. So he brings it first. The main focus of doing mitzvahs is the revelation of the redemption. Once he speaks of the revelation of the redemption, he says that, yeah, you have to do the mitzvahs now, which is connected to redemption. Because he wants to keep our eye on the prize, that it's all about the redemption. And therefore, he says that's why he starts off with the first insight of the redemption. Because everything, he says, everything comes from Torah. Everything comes from Torah. As we know the famous line, it says, Istakel be'raiso bara alma. You want to create a world? You have to look in the Torah. And since Torah of the Tzemach Tzedek, what does he do? He brings which insight first? Redemption. So therefore, because he brings the insight of redemption first, therefore that draws down in the world that redemption comes first. So even though technically it's later, but because he brings it first, Torah establishes that redemption comes first. And it's really all about the redemption. The vision is the redemption. Yeah, we do the mitzvahs now to have the redemption, but it's really all about the redemption. And the Rebbe brings something very, very powerful, and he says like this, that when a Jew, and how much more so a Nasi, the Tzemach Tzedek, thinks about something good, which is again the redemption, so the thought of the redemption makes it happen that the redemption should be first. And like the Rebbe quotes the famous teaching from the Tzemach Tzedek, which was taught and disseminated through the previous Rebbe. What did he say? Trach gut wird sein gut. So it's a teaching from the Tzemach Tzedek, and the one that publicized it was the previous Rebbe. It says it in Yiddish. Trach gut wird sein gut. Think good, it will be good. Think redemption, you'll have redemption. And the previous Rebbe told us the famous story that a Chassid once came to him, And he was complaining about challenges that he had and so on and so forth. Big issue, big famous, powerful story. And the Rebbe doesn't quote the story here, so I'm not going to share the story right now, but you can look it up. The Rebbe says a story like this. So, the answer part. So the Tzemach Tzedek told the Chassid, and he told him as follows, that if you will think good, it's going to be good. And the Chassid went, and he was able to force himself to think good, and that's exactly what happened. Now, the Rebbe says the fact that it wasn't just a teaching, think good will be good. They actually added a story, where there's a story and someone came and was concerned and worried, and he told him, think good will be good. Why did he say a story? Because since it's a story, that means it's a real reality that happened. So it's translated into the physical world. That even though it wasn't good, but by thinking good, it changed the reality and it became good. And like the Rebbe says, that it's known that the prophets, they would do a physical action. Why? In reference to their prophecy. Why? Because by doing a physical action, you take the prophecy, which is abstract, and you bring it down physical into the world. And the Rebbe says, when you take a thought and you speak about it, and then, matter of fact, even more than that, you actually act on it, it has a much more greater impact. And how much more so the Rebbe says in our case? Besides the fact that the thought of the Tzemach Tzedek, of giving the insight of הבאים ישרש Yaakov, which is the Geula, which technically happened later, which is going to happen later. He brought it first, and he wrote it down. That means it's action. He wrote it down. That becomes Torah. That Geula comes first. By writing it, he established the fact that redemption comes first. And the Rebbe finishes off. It should be the will of Hashem. By speaking in these words. Words of what? Redemption. It should usher in quickly. Very, very quickly. And specifically by doing the work of spreading Judaism in general. And specifically spreading Chassidus, like we're doing now. We're learning Torah on the internet, YouTube. The whole world can learn Chassidus. Which that is a preparation, a practical preparation. And by you guys sharing this Chassidus class with many, you're participating in sharing the teaching of Chassidus, of fulfilling the promise that it says in the Torah, Umalla ha'aretz deyas Hashem. The whole world will be filled with the knowledge of Yudke Vavke, which is only explained in Chassidus. Kamayim layom mechasim. Just like the water covers up everything, and which this is a verse that the Rambam, who was his yahrzeit, is the Chaf Tevis this week, and he finishes off in his book in the book of Maimonides, which is also connected to the beginning of the book of Maimonides, where he starts with the book that we need to know Leida sheyesha matzei rishoin. We have to know there's a God in the world. And it's also connected, the Rebbe says, this week we also have the anniversary, the Hilula of the Alter Rebbe passing away. And he writes in his book, in the holy book of Tanya, which we also have on YouTube, you can learn Tanya, and which is on Chaf Daled Tevis when he passed away. He also explains in depth the idea of Yediyas Hashem, knowing Hashem. So the Rebbe says it should be in the will of Hashem, that in the merit of the Baal Hilula, of the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam, that both of them gathered together in their books. The whole Torah. The Rambam has the whole Torah. He did a commentary on the whole Torah. The Alter Rebbe has the whole Torah in there. The Mishnah Torah from the Rambam, which gathered all the halachot of the revealed part of Torah. And the Alter Rebbe gathered in his book of the Kutei Amarim Tanya all the ideas of Chassidus. It's the Bible of mysticism. And also the books of Torah, the Chassidic Parsha of the Alter Rebbe, the Kutei Torah, wherein there you have a conglomerate of many, many Chassidic discourses, the foundations of mysticism of the Alter Rebbe, which was put together by the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson. This will bring about, and it's just like they gathered, this will bring about will bring about quickly the ultimate promise, what it says in the prophet, in the Haftorah, V'atem teluktu li'echad echad b'nei Yisrael, that each and every one of us will be gathered from all over the world. Kadosh Baruch Hu h'atzma, Hashem is going to gather us. That very, very soon, Hashem is going to gather all of us, and we're all going to go to Eretz HaKodesh with tremendous abundance, because we know Hashem, Yarchiv Hashem Elokecha Tzvuch, Hashem is going to widen the boundaries of Israel. And specifically, we're going to go to Eretz Yisrael, but more important, to Yerushalayim and to the Beis HaMikdash, which is going to be built speedily in our days. So as you can tell, this is a very, very powerful Chassidic discourse. It teaches us the power of doing mitzvahs, the power of the mitzvahs that were done in the times of the temple when the light was on, that created tremendous light when Mashiach's coming, the power of doing mitzvahs in Galus, Chasheichel and Ahira, but more importantly, Habayim Yashresh Yaakov, as the Rebbe brings in the Tzemach Tzedek, which is the first insight, which is referring to the Geula. And by putting Geula first, we will have Geula in our lives. And as the Rebbe said, Trach gut v'zayin gut. We have to do it in thought, and we have to do it in speech and action. And if we trach gut and we think good, we'll all be blessed with a great life. So let's hope we think good, and we think for the greatest good. As the Rebbe says, we should all merit to go to Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, and God willing, our next class will be given in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Have a great, blessed week with positive thoughts, positive speech, and positive action. Shavua Tov.